Okay, so welcome to everyone who's joining this event. We're going to give it another minute or so that people can join in and get comfortable. Okay, I think we'll get started. Welcome to everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to our Air Quality in Cork event. We're delighted to see you all here today and to see the level of interest in this event. It's really been very exciting. This is part of UCC Community Week. My name is Tamela Maciel. I'm the project manager for a project called Radical, which is led by UCC to develop a brand new type of sensor for air pollution. And through this project, I've gotten to know Cork, Cork's air, and the people involved in trying to better understand and improve Cork's air quality. So it's really through these connections that this event has come about. And it's been a truly collaborative effort. So I wanted to start by saying thank you to everyone who's been involved, all of our speakers on the panel today, and behind the scenes, and especially to those involved with UCC Community Week, the UCC Environmental Research Institute, and Cork City Council who join us here today. So just a couple of housekeeping notes before we begin. We will have a Q&A session at the very end for about 20 minutes. We would love your questions about anything to do with Cork air quality. Be sure and put your questions in the Q&A box. That way we can see them, we can see votes. If you like a particular question, you can vote on that and we'll be more likely to see it. And if you have a general comment about the event, you can put it in the chat box. We will be recording today's event, but no videos or names from attendees will be visible. It'll just be the panelists and the slides that you see. And we'll circulate that recording on Monday afternoon, along with any links that we mention and a feedback form. So this is the first type of event we run like this. And if you like it, let us know. We'd love to pass that on to our funders. If you have any suggestions of how we can improve it for next year, please let us know as well. So without further ado, I'll introduce our panelists today. So I'm delighted to be joined by a very kind of expert and illustrious panel today. And in order of appearance, first we'll hear from Professor John Wenger, who leads the Center for Research into Atmospheric Chemistry at UCC. That's more commonly known as the Crack Lab. John will talk about air quality in Ireland more generally, the sources of pollution and the health impacts of high air pollution. We'll then hear from Dr. Stig Hellebust, who's also in the Crack Lab. Stig has been described to me as the MacGyver of atmospheric chemistry. He does a lot of field work, deploying sensors, looking at, for example, in the mountains after wildfires, but also in Cork City and the network of sensors there. We'll then hear from Dr. Marica Cassarino, who is in UCC Applied Psychology, and she's particularly interested in public attitudes towards air quality and air quality measures. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Dean Venebles, also in the Crack Lab, and he's got a wide expertise in different instruments to measure air quality. And today he'll particularly talk about monitoring traffic emissions, NO2 around schools. And finally, we'll hear from Dr. Kevin Ryan. He's an executive scientist at Cork City Council, and he particularly looks at some of the air quality initiatives from the City Council. And he's going to introduce their first air quality strategy, which has just been published this year. And it's a first for any local authority in Ireland before Dublin and before a national strategy even. So the schedule is to hear from each of our speakers in turn, about 10 minutes from John, 5 minutes from each of our other speakers, and then open it up to your questions. So without further ado, John, I'll stop sharing my screen and pass it over to you.
Thank you very much, Tamela. Hello, everybody. I'm so glad that so many of you could join us today. I hope you enjoy it. You find it very informative, and as Tamela said, get ready with your questions for later on, okay? Okay. So I'm just going to give a bit of an overview really of air quality in Cork and why it's important. Just to start off really, why do we care about air quality? And the simple answer is because polluted air is bad for us. It affects health, it can cause strokes, it can cause heart disease, it can affect the lungs, cause lung cancer in extreme cases, it can cause respiratory diseases such as asthma and so on. And overall, around the world, around 7 million deaths result every single year due to exposure from both outdoor and household air pollution. The vast majority of those deaths would occur in other places around the world, or about 500,000 of those actually occur in Europe. And air pollution is the new tobacco, warns the WHO head. So it's obviously a very, very big topic. When you look at reports from the European Environment Agency, who collate all the air quality data from Europe, they're very strong in their statements. They say that air pollution remains the single largest environmental health hazard in Europe. Around 500,000 premature deaths occur every year from exposure to air pollution in Europe. And in Ireland, it's all 1,200 premature deaths every single year. That's about 4 or 5 times the number of people who are killed in road traffic accidents, for example. And through more and more research in this topic, we're finding out that it's the particles in the air that are the key impact on human health. This article here, for example, on the left from The Guardian, talks about toxic air pollution particles found in human brains. The article on the right talks about air pollution particles found in mothers' placentas. And what we're finding is that exposure to air pollution doesn't just affect the lungs or the heart, it can affect the whole body. As I mentioned, the particles in the air are the problem pollutant. We call it particulate matter, which is suspended in air. These particles are tiny. They're way smaller than a grain of sand, for example. That grain of sand there is 90 micrometers. Okay, so it's a fraction of a millimeter. And these particles are actually invisible, but they're moving around in the air, and we, of course, breathe them in. We breathe in 11,000 liters of air per day, so we have potential to breathe in a lot of particles as well. And the particles that affect us the most are particles that are less than particles less than 10 microns in diameter, and they're called PM10. And looking at that diagram, you can see here, particles less than 10 microns can actually enter into the respiratory system, the upper part of it at least, okay? The larger particles end up getting deposited, and only particles less than 2.5 microns actually get into the lungs. So these smaller sized particles actually get into the lungs, and they carry the greatest health risk. So short-term exposure can affect the heart and the lungs, can trigger asthma attacks and so on. Long-term exposure to lots of air pollution can lead to premature death from cardiovascular and respiratory diseases, and as I said before, even lung cancer in extreme cases. So PM is one of the main air pollutants that we're concerned about. One of the other main air pollutants that we're concerned about is actually nitrogen dioxide, NO2. Here is a list of all sorts of air pollutants that are present in the air. You'll see that most of these are in fact gases, okay, except particulate matter and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are bound to particulate matter. They're a subcomponent of it. And particulate matter and NO2 are mainly produced from combustion processes. And in Ireland, the main source of those is in fact residential emissions from solid fuel burning, for example, and transport. People often think that the biggest air pollution sources are in fact industry or power stations. That's not the case, especially in Ireland. It's residential, solid fuel burning, and transport. We also have agriculture as a main source of emissions. It emits large amounts of volatile organic compounds. That's the nasty smells you get from manure spreading, slurry spreading, and so on, but also a huge amount of ammonia. Agriculture is responsible for 99% of the emissions of ammonia, which actually react in the atmosphere to form secondary particulate matter. So they are also important. So those are 3 sectors that we're most interested in: residential, transport, and agriculture. And in our Centre for Research into Atmospheric Chemistry, the CRAC lab, we are aiming to look at better understanding the impact of these emissions on the composition of the air and how they affect air quality, health, the environment, but also climate. And we do this through a combination of studies. We go to the lab here on the left. You will see we have what we call simulation chambers, where in the lab we can actually simulate the atmosphere. We have air which we can add chemicals to or emissions. We then look at the chemical processes that might occur in air to understand what happens to individual pollutants. We can also have a mobile lab. We equip a van or a container with lots of instruments for measuring gases and particles in the air, and we can track pollutants over time, and we can try to link them to different sources, and we go to different locations to do that. And finally, for the last few years, we've also had an air quality monitoring station on the UCC campus. Just a brief word about the atmospheric simulation chambers. This is a major part of our work. These are custom-built laboratory facilities that are used to investigate the atmospheric impact of emissions from human activities, but also natural sources. So we currently have projects looking at emissions from automobiles, solid fuel burning, agricultural emissions, but also trees and plants, for example. And the good thing about the simulation chamber is it allows us to really focus in on specific chemicals or mixtures of chemicals and look at their chemistry in detail. And we can change and control the composition. We can control the light, the relative humidity, and other factors. And of course, we can have lots of instruments attached to the chamber to measure what's going on. Our newest facility, funded by Science Foundation Ireland, is a very large facility in the wonderful Kane building on UCC campus. It's 1.1 million euros worth of investment. And we have an even wider range of techniques that are available for measuring gases and particles. And the key thing about part of our research as well is that we're going to use this chamber as a test bed for new atmospheric measurement techniques. And the key project at the moment that we're working on is a project called Radical, and Tamela is the project manager for that. And it's a very ambitious project involving many EU partners, looking at designing, constructing, and testing a new sensor for radicals in the atmosphere, which very much control the chemistry. And so we're very excited about this project that will take place over the next few years. More can be found out at the web page shown in red here. Going outside of the lab into the wilds of outside, we have taken our mobile labs. You can see the van and the container here to various locations over the last decade or so. We've started off in Cork docks, Cork Harbour, looking at shipping emissions. We then went to Galway to look at the natural emissions coming off the Atlantic Ocean. And then we buddied up with some partners in Europe to look at a range of different other locations. So for example, we also went to Dunkirk to look at emissions from metalworking facilities. But then we also went to Paris and Barcelona to look at urban air pollution in large cities. And finally, after all that hard work, we took a rest on the beaches of Corsica to look at background aerosols and particles in the Mediterranean. And if you're one of my lucky PhD students, you get to spend a summer in Corsica. If you're less lucky, then you might get to spend a winter in Burr, County Offaly. But look, it's such a sunny day, you can see. It's a rare sunny day in Burr, County Offaly in December. Just an example of the results that we get. With the instruments that we use, we can work out the chemical composition and the sources of particles. And here is some results from the study that we performed in Cork. We did some summer measurements. Here is August 2008, and we measured the total concentration of PM2.5. And then we were able to divide that mass into different source contributions. What we found is that traffic, 23%, other sources which are hard to pin down, 24%, regional sources from around the area, 26%. But when we went to the winter, PM2.5 concentration increased. The amount of particulates due to solid fuel burning jumped up. Now, solid fuel burning is the dominant contributor in Cork in the winter months. Traffic remains about the same as the other sources as well. Our monitoring station has been open for the last 3 years or so, and we've been monitoring air pollutants as part of the national network run by the EPA. We measure PM2.5 using a beta attenuation monitor and also automated analyzers for nitrogen oxides and ozone. Our air quality data is streamed live here on the website shared by the EPA. When we look at the air pollution in Cork, let's first look at NO2. Here is the monthly average values. So we're going through the year, January through December. We see the values here are highest in January and February, also again here in November and December. So we have NO2 highest in the winter months and lowest in the summer. In the summer, we have photochemistry happening. We have sunlight sometimes, and it can break up NO2, nitrogen dioxide, to give us oxygen atoms, which coupled with O2 to give us ozone. So we can get a more ozone formation during the summer months. Looking at the daily pattern of NO2, especially during the winter months here, we see a very nice consistent pattern, right? This is a 24-hour profile, and we're starting the day here, maybe 7, 8 a.m. in the morning, okay? And we see a sharp rise in NO2, peaking around about 9 a.m., dropping away. And this is very obviously due to traffic emissions. Okay, so NO2 coming from diesel and petrol vehicles. It falls away during the midday, but then comes back during the evening. And during the evening here, during the winter months, we very much see a combination of traffic emissions, plus also NO2 from the burning of solid fuels in the home. Looking at PM2.5, the pattern isn't quite so obvious, but we do have higher PM2.5 concentrations during winter months and lower during summer. And you can see through 2018, 2019, 2020, you can see the effect there. Looking at a daily profile for PM2.5 during those same months, January through March, we see that we have a baseline level during the day, which then rises to a factor of about 3 times higher during the nighttime. Again, very indicative of solid fuel burning being very much the dominant source during winter months. And when we look at the overall picture over the whole year, we can get an annual average concentration for PM2.5. And what we see here is that the annual average concentration is of the order of about 8 microgram per meter cubed. It may not sound like much, but we breathe in a lot of air, remember. How does this compare to the EU limit value? Well, the EU limit value is actually 25. So we're way under the annual average value for the EU. The World Health Organization sets more stringent guideline values. And at the moment, it currently is 10 microgram per meter cubed. So we're not far off that. Only last few weeks have the WHO issued some newer guideline values, which are greatly reduced. So the PM2.5 concentration that's projected for the WHO is actually 5 microgram per meter cube. And of course, we are above those values at UCC. For NO2, the average value is around about 9 microgram per meter cube. Again, that's way less than the EU limit value. So we're compliant with the air quality legislation. And we're also compliant with the WHO guidelines. But interestingly, the WHO are going to bring that down a lot to 10 microgram per meter cube, which is very close to the values that we obtain in this location. I just want to stress that this location is really typical of an urban background location in Ireland. It's on our campus. If you were to be roadside, the values would be much higher, of course. If we were to go to residential areas where more solid fuel burning is taking place, then I think Stig Hellebust will show that you see a big effect there as well. So that's me for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That was great. Really interesting data, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions to dive into that. Following up on some of the data and the sensors, particularly in Cork City, I'm delighted to welcome Stig Hellebust with us. Stig, if you want to go ahead and share your screen.
Yes. Hello, everybody. Okay. Thank you for attending today. It's great to be talking to you, even though I can't see you. I'm going to talk about the air quality in Cork. The data that John showed, that was from the official air quality monitoring station that we're operating at UCC. So Cork is actually very well served by the official monitoring network, air quality monitoring network in Cork. In Ireland, and this is a network which is designed for compliance monitoring. So if any of these stations show an exceedance of the limits that John showed, that has legal implications for Ireland. But but these are expensive. It's an expensive network to operate, and there is a limit to how many locations we can actually have that level of monitoring. So I'm going to talk about some data that we have obtained with a different type of monitoring network called the low-cost sensors. The low-cost sensors are measuring the same thing, but they're doing it slightly differently with technologies that you can package in small units at a low cost, and the advantage of that is that you can distribute the measurements widely. But it is important to be aware that they do not comply with the same data quality standards that the official monitoring stations do. So they're not good enough for compliance monitoring, but they are useful. So in Cork, there is a local network of low-cost devices from a manufacturer called Purple Air. They exist worldwide. There's a website anybody can go and see, and there's about 15 of them, thereabouts, distributed around Cork City. And what's important about the Cork City network is that it is planned and it's managed. So a lot of the low-cost sensors that you will see in these worldwide maps are commercial companies selling devices. So it's a consumer product, and people buy them and they put them up in the street, and that is of course very useful to the person buying them. But the network that follows from that is not a planned network, and when the network isn't planned, there is no oversight. So but the Cork City network, which is planned and managed, it also comes with a separate air quality dashboard, which is developed for the purpose, because it's important to be aware that the values that are reported by some of these low-cost devices, they are wrong. They can be out by a factor of 2 or more, but they can be corrected. You can actually employ a correction model that will bring the reported values in line with reference equipment. There is still an error, but it is close enough that you can get some useful information out of it, and that is what Cork City has done. And having sensors all over the city means that you can then compare the air quality in different parts of the city, and that can be quite interesting. So you can do it by the map and say the south, east, northwest, and where do you have the best air quality. Or you can do it by the type of environment that you're in. Is it a residential area, or is it the city center, or is it a small town in the country which is used by commuters? Or, and this can give some interesting insights. For example, looking at this graph, well, you notice maybe 2 things: that isn't that much of a difference, but it's also clear that a small town in the country is not necessarily cleaner than a residential area in the city. So just because cities might have a bad name in an air quality context, it's not always the case that there's clean air in small towns in the country and dirty air in the city. And this is related obviously to the solid fuel burning. But averages are quite deceptive, because if we break it down into a typical profile from morning to night, it's also very clear that for most of the day, the air is quite clean. In a residential part of Cork City, we see very low values for most of the day, but we see this big increase at night. And clearly, the only source of note in a residential area is solid fuel burning. And now we can start looking at how the trends look in different parts of the city. And you can see commuting patterns as well. But here, if we're comparing a residential part of the city and a residential town in the country, you can see that, in fact, the commuter town sees higher values of PM all of the day. And in fact, it also experiences more traffic emissions in the morning. And I can show you a series of these graphs, but I'm going to just try and go through them briefly for the sake of time. And if you just look at the headings, we can actually see an effect of things like the smoky coal ban. So regulation does have an impact here. And in a roadside location, you will often see that it goes down at night compared to the other parts of the city because it's less of a residential area. And of course, there are some locations that experience pollution both by day and by night because they're hit by both sources. A very important message I'd like to make is that these sensors are cheap to buy, but it's not cheap to operate a network that if you're going to get useful information out of it. So you need a lot of units and they need to be maintained, calibrated and managed. You can't just put it up and think that it will give you good results day in, day out for years, because they won't. But there are lots of good examples of citizen science air quality networks out there, and in some countries they are working on actually using them also in a more official capacity. But the main message from an experience from everybody working with these sensors in the professional capacity is that on their own they have limited use, but if you combine the information of multiple sensors, you get meaningful results. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stig. And it's great, like for those of us living in Cork, it's great to have such a well-calibrated sensor network to know that it does kind of match up with the research and the reference instruments that you guys have in UCC as well. So that was really interesting. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. We're going to go on to Marica Cassarino now. So Stig, if you go ahead and stop sharing your slides. Marica is a psychologist that looks at air quality public attitudes and has been involved in recent surveys to look at this as well. So this is kind of the other side of the coin, I suppose. Marica, if you want to go ahead and start sharing your screen.
Yes, hi everyone.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. Now, can you see my screen? Hopefully you can.
Not yet. Might be on its way.
Yeah, that's because I didn't press share. There you go. Okay. Can you see now?
We can, yes.
Fantastic. Okay, hi everyone. Marica here from School of Applied Psychology, and I'm also a member of the Environmental Research Institute. And as Tamela was saying, I have collaborated with Crack Lab and Cork City Council on a couple of projects looking at air quality in the city, and I'm particularly interested in seeing how people feel about air quality, but also initiatives that are around air quality. And what I'm going to present on here is a project that we've just concluded, where we looked at how people in Cork felt or feel about the possibility of receiving air quality alerts and about air quality forecasting. And I just want to thank Gregory Gorman, who was an intern for this project, and it was a great help for data analysis and reporting. So just to give you a sense of what air quality forecasting is it's very much similar to weather forecasting. So it's a technique that you use to kind of predict the concentration of pollutants in the atmosphere for a given time, for a given location. And it is used in some parts of the world to form alerts then can be utilized to for exposure mitigation, so kind of limit the exposure of vulnerable people, but also to try and influence behavioral change around air quality. So you've heard from John and Stig about all the brilliant facilities, amazing network of sensors that we have in Cork. And there are in development models related to air quality forecasting for Cork, and I think also more broadly for Ireland. But we were interested in seeing, how people would feel about a facility like that. So potentially receiving alerts similar to the weather forecast, but related to air quality. And we looked at that, but we also looked at how, say, people's attitudes towards air quality and its potential impact on health. And we hope that those findings could inform kind of future messaging strategies or intervention to try and increase the engagement of the public with air quality. So with regards to our survey, and I wish to thank all the organizations and individuals who helped us to distribute the survey, we had around 500 respondents, slightly more female than male. Now in this graph, you can see the distribution of our respondents across electoral areas in Cork, and we had some also from outside Cork City, Cork City boundaries. Each part is an age group. So you can see here that we had a slightly higher representation of younger groups, although the distribution varied across electoral divisions. But thankfully, we had representation from all age groups, which was great. We asked people how they felt about air quality, how concerned they were, and the vast majority reported having some level or high level of concern around air quality. And a good number of them felt that the air quality in the area of residence, particularly in winter, poses a risk to the health of particularly vulnerable people. So high level of say concerns, slightly in contrast with low awareness around air quality monitoring and low levels of engagement with information around air quality, and certainly low awareness of air quality forecasting, which you would expect because it's not something that you usually talk about when you drink coffee with your friends. But interesting also, when we ask people about what they felt were the main causes of air pollution in the area, as you can see here from this graph, we asked about different things. And here with activities, we mean home activities and mainly home heating. You can see here that people identified motor traffic as an important cause of air pollution. A number of people also identified industrial activities, but the impact of home heating, which we have just seen from other presentations being very important, was actually a little bit underestimated, which we found interesting. And even more interestingly, when we asked participants in the survey to tell us what they thought, what factors could help them to contribute to better air quality, 2/3 of people felt that their ability to make a contribution to better air quality depended really on external factors, not on their own behavior. So people mentioned transport infrastructure and policies importantly. So that's how people felt about air quality. And then we asked people to tell us about their views on potentially having air quality warnings based on forecasting in Cork City. And in this graph here, you can see the green bars are people who are happy about it, so with positive feelings. Yellow, we have positive but with reservations. Then we have red, some people who weren't really too happy about it, and a small number of people who were indifferent. For those who had kind of positive views on this potential facility, the main benefits that were mentioned were firstly, and to a greater extent, increasing education and awareness around air quality. So making people more aware, making the public more aware. Some people also mentioned the possibility of exposure mitigation. So once again, people who might be a bit more vulnerable could receive that quality, the warning and make decisions on what, let's say, transport choices or home heating. And to a lesser extent, also the possibility of influence impacting directly behavioral change, particularly in terms of transport choices and home heating choices. But a number of people pointed out that a facility like this, so an air quality warning based on forecasting, although useful, will need also some other changes in order to be powerful. And people, first of all, pointed out the importance of kind of coupling the warnings with some positive messaging around action. So telling people not just that tomorrow their air will be of poor quality, but try and tell them what they could do about it. To try and empowering people. And at a broader level, people felt that a resource like this should be coupled also with important policy changes and infrastructure. We also asked people about how they felt that receiving a warning for poor air quality might influence their behavior. And we asked about home heating, but also transport choices. We were glad to see that more than a third of people felt that receiving negative air quality warnings might help them to make kind of long-term changes with regards to home heating, particularly people who stated that they use solid fuel for home heating. But they felt that most people felt that the impact on car usage or walking, whether for utility or leisure, would be just short-term. So it's interesting to see there how the behavioral impact might be different depending on the behavior. And finally, we asked people about how they would like to engage with potential air quality warnings. And most people across the board, so across age groups, people preferred online media, but particularly online media that they could receive, that would be easy to access. So people mentioned social media, mobile apps, electronic road signs. Now, there were some differences in the sense that people age 60 plus preferred more mobile apps than social media, so something that they could receive directly. And some people also I gave an input about saying that the possibility of integrating the air quality warning with the weather forecast. So as you can see, kind of positive feelings, with some for some important reservation and some interest, some appetite that there for engagement with this kind of information around air quality. So that's all from me, and I hope I didn't take too much time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was fascinating and really nice to have that extra perspective as well. Thanks to everyone sending their questions in. That's great. Reminder to use the Q&A, and if you see a question that you like, be sure and vote for that as well. We're going to move on to Dean Venebles, and he's going to talk about particularly school areas and traffic emissions and NO2. So Dean, if you want to go ahead and share your screen.
Okay, can you see that?
We can, yes.
Okay, so, well, hello, I'm Dean Venebles, and I'm really pleased to be part of this discussion. I think it's a really valuable part of the way UCC engages with the community, and also it's important to see that, and good to see that air quality is getting a lot of attention here in Cork. So I'll focus on transport emissions, and John has covered some of this, some of the issues here already. Transport emissions or transport-related air pollution, or TRAP, are mostly particulate matter and nitrogen dioxide that are produced by vehicles. And these are a problem because commuters and people living near roads, working near busy roads, can be exposed to very high levels of pollution. And I feel I want to stop over here very briefly and say, if you're driving an electric vehicle or thinking about getting one, they're not entirely emission-free. They don't have exhausts, but they do produce particulate matter when they're in use through road wear and tire wear and so on. So I think that's an important correction that needs to be stated, even though they are quite useful in terms of reducing overall particulate levels. Okay, so the health impacts of NO2 include cardiovascular mortality, lung cancer, and increased risk of developing childhood asthma. And as John has pointed out, the WHO guidelines, the revised ones, now see a very sharp drop in the recommended maximum levels for nitrogen dioxide. Part of the problem is that monitoring transport emissions is quite difficult because these are very high around the road network. And so the traditional monitoring network is poorly suited to studying transport-related air pollution. So we've seen exceedances in Dublin recently. And the bottom figure on the right over here shows a report commissioned by the EPA. This is a modeling study predicting levels of NO2 around Dublin. And you can see that we have very, very high levels around the road network and the motorways, the main arterial routes. And so these are an example of how localized air pollution can be in different contexts. What we don't know is what the situation is like in Cork, and we need more information on that. So my group's research is focused on spectroscopic instrument development, and we have another project that is continuing this to look at NO2, again, that important transport related air pollutant. And our goals here are to develop a sensor that is fast, that is sensitive, that is accurate, but that can also be produced at moderate cost. The top figure here shows a basic idea that the absorption of light by nitrogen dioxide is very useful for remote sensing. And so these are actual measurements from satellites. And so you can see where we have high pollution hotspots in Europe. One of the ways we'd like to see this used is to monitor smaller towns and also use in developing countries where air quality monitoring is not so well established because of the costs involved. So let's go on to another project, which is to take low-cost sensors, as Stig has been speaking about, slightly different ones now, and to use them in mobile measurements to monitor air quality on Cork City streets. These are projects supported by Cork City Council, and mostly they've been summer projects over the last year or so. So these are quite challenging measurements to make in terms of instrumentation, but also in terms of the analysis of data and the variability that you get as you sample streets and the weather changes as well as traffic patterns change. So our approach has been to use duplicate sensors, duplicate low-cost sensors, because this gives us a lot more confidence that the signal that we're seeing is actually associated with changes in atmospheric composition. So the figure on the top right shows the two sensors that we had as we were traveling, as we were riding around Cork, and they're both responding in the same way. So that gives us a lot of confidence that these are showing real changes in air quality. The other approach is to repeat the same route regularly. So the more observations we have of the same route, the better our analysis of the data can be. There's very much data still in progress. The color coding here is not related to air quality, it's actually just bicycle speed. But we're looking forward to getting this data out in the next few months. And finally, air quality outside schools. There's a lot of concern about air pollution and how it in fact affects children. Children are more vulnerable to air pollution for a number of reasons. So this project aims to characterize the air pollution around the school, and particularly around the school run. There's an existing project to monitor this, a citizen science project called Globe Ireland. A large number of schools are involved, and it uses a sensor that takes in nitrogen dioxide. These are great measurements, great to get kids participating in them. But this is a measurement over a couple months. Then these tubes are then sent off for analysis, and a single value in terms of air concentration is returned. So it doesn't give you a sense of changes in air composition at a particular time or the relationship to air quality at the time children are in school. So we're using the bicycle monitoring system, and we're going to adapt that. And we want to get the time dependence of nitrogen dioxide concentrations around schools. And we're also working with Marica to understand people's behavior around how they transport their children to school, so we get better insight into that. So again, this is supported by Cork City Council, and I think that's me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean. It's been exciting to see the Globe Ireland initiative kick off recently on Twitter. A lot of really happy-looking school kids getting involved in monitoring their local air around their schools. Final speaker today, before we open up to some of the great questions that have been coming in, is Kevin from Cork City Council, Kevin Ryan. Delighted you're joining us today, and he's going to be talking about the new Cork air quality strategy. So Kevin, if you want to go ahead and share your screen.
Okay. Right, well, I think I'm off mute. Okay, good afternoon all. Thank you for inviting me to speak. I'm going to give the perspective, I suppose, of air quality in Cork City from a council perspective, I suppose, in terms of what we do. And I'll also maybe give a brief introduction to our air quality strategy that we've recently launched just back in August. Okay, so first of all, I want to comment that there's a team of us obviously involved in the air quality rollout across the city. There's Michael McGrath, who's I suppose leads the air quality element of it in terms of he operates the laboratory here in Cork, and also he oversees the instruments on behalf of the EPA in terms of the national network. Okay, there's also myself and Anthony Angelini, who've been doing a lot of work on the air quality strategy itself. And there is also a technician, Robin Bateman, who has been huge help in rolling out the low-cost network for particulate matter that Stig Hellebust previously mentioned. So, so from a local authority role, it's very much in terms of we are enforcing regulations. So our environmental management team enforces the decorative paints regulations, the solvents regulations, the petroleum vapors regulations, storage of dangerous substances regulations, and also probably what most folks would be more privy to, the solid fuel regulations in terms of the prohibition on the sale and distribution and burning of smoky coal in the city area. We've also been doing a lot of work on the ambient air quality monitoring as well, using the that we actually as maintain 2 of the 4 regulatory sensors here in the city as well. So that's what Michael McGrath and his team work on. Okay, so we just recently launched our air quality strategy. We're the first in the country to do so. It's it can be perhaps a little dangerous sometimes to be the first to stick your head above the parapet, but it was felt that it was time for the council to put a strategy together, and there was huge support from the city council executive, from elected members, and from the citizens of Cork as well. So it was launched in August, even though the strategy actually says July. There was a slight delay, but it had gone to print, so July is what's on the text. So there's the strategy is it has 5 chapters. It's not it's not overly cumbersome in terms of reading. It is about 50 odd pages, and it's a very comprehensive introduction to air quality, and we outline kind of policy and regulations, and also detail about the air quality monitoring in Cork that's currently ongoing in terms of the regulatory EPA network, and a brief mention of our low-cost network that we've launched just last year. There's also a very comprehensive chapter on action themes and how we're going to implement and actually roll out all our various facets of improving air quality in Cork. There is, I think, 67 objectives in total. I had it written in front of me, but I think it's a 67. So a fairly comprehensive suite of objectives that we intend to work on over the next 5 years. So it's a 2021 to 2026 plan. Okay. So the action themes that we have identified that require action and work. First one is health and well-being. Second is looking at air quality monitoring, enhancing the network. 3 is the travel theme, and then we look at electric vehicles and the charging infrastructure. And we also look at the regulatory regulations and enforcement, specifically around the prohibitions of sale and distribution of the smoky coals. And then we look at green infrastructure. It's like the parks, the nature-based solutions element of assisting in enhancing air quality. We also look at the research and innovation element, some of which the previous speakers have outlined, and that Cork City Council has given a small contribution to some of the works that are ongoing, and we will continue to do so as well. Just maybe I'll go through some of the themes in more detail. So under the health and well-being, we carried out a number of public surveys before we even launched the strategy, because we wanted to get a feel for what was the public attitudes towards air quality in Cork. And Marica Cassarino has followed up with a number of these surveys also. And both surveys have been very, very informative. We have updated our website, a pretty comprehensive update in terms of information on air quality and specific links to air quality, both at a national and EU level. We're working on developing public awareness campaigns. There's a number of items in the pipeline there. We're also looking to develop connections with schools and colleges. We've developed a really strong connection already with UCC Crack Lab, and we're looking to do some projects with the schools. And ultimately we would like to develop a city clean air day. So that's to come into the future. Okay, in terms of air quality monitoring, we're ahead of ourselves in a lot of these objectives. Now we've achieved them, some of them already. So the rollout of the district level air quality monitoring infrastructure in the city that Stig Hellebust has outlined, and also that we have the highest quality instrumentation available to staff. We have created a dashboard in cooperation with the Crack Lab also, that's publicly available. We'll give you a near live availability of data in terms of PM2.5, but it's an indicative network. And also we intend to put together an annual air quality report each year. The first one will be in 2022, and so it would outline all our works that we carried out in 2021. So look out for that. In terms of transport, it's there's a lot of work being done in transport. City Council fleet, we have adapted 76 vehicles to total emission-free electric vehicles or near emission-free. We're also doing a lot of work with the bus and rail network. Now we are facilitators there rather than the lead in terms of bus networks and rail network infrastructure. Looking at how to perhaps look at last mile deliveries, and that could work in terms of freight, HGVs, etc. In terms of depots, could there perhaps be EV, electric vehicle delivery of freight into the city centre rather than having diesel powered trucks come in. So again, these are all reports that we will work on. They're the projects we will work on in cooperation with the private sector as well. We have done a huge amount of work in terms of enhancing the cycling infrastructure. I won't go into the huge amount of detail that we have, but I suppose one of the maybe flagship schemes is the Marina cycling infrastructure upgrade, and the one that goes from Blackrock to the Passage West. That is ongoing at present. So that's one of the major ones ongoing, as well as multiple other cycling enhancement and safer cycling schemes in the city that have been ongoing. There's also increased pedestrianisation in terms of footpaths, widening footpaths, traffic restrictions across the city. I think if you take a walk through the city centre and the suburb, you will see the amount of work that has been done and is ongoing. Okay, I think 24 million was awarded to the City Council for enhanced cycling and pedestrian infrastructure just recently, and that is going to be money well spent, I think. Okay, in terms of EV charging, we're currently putting together an EV strategy in terms of how we roll out a charging network across the city. And installing chargers can be quite expensive. There are, I think, up to there are 2 chargers in the Paul Street area. There's 2 chargers, public chargers in the North Main Street area, and we have some here in Tremore Valley Park as well. So watch out for that. It will be rolled out. So we'll also put together an updated developers guidance on how to install private EV charging facilities at residences and or new buildings. So as I said, there's also going to be an outline of a roadmap for EV delivery. So it's not just going to be piecemeal here and there. It's going to be a proper format of how to deliver these across the city. In terms of regulation enforcement, the main theme here, as I said here, is that we continue to enforce smoky coals prohibition, sale, distribution, and burning, and that really has had the biggest effect, I would say, in Cork City in terms of air quality. Think of perhaps back to the early 90s when there was quite a huge amount of smog, we would say, in the city. That is largely gone, due to the prohibition on smoky coals. Now you will still get high particulate matter on cold evenings when, at 3-4 o'clock when everyone lights their solid fuel fires. That's just part of where we need to tackle, part of the story where we need to tackle and work on that. We continue to do inspections and in terms of fuel suppliers, and we continue to respond to complaints in terms of air pollution. So there's a lot of work going on in the background. There's always the service delivery element. It's not just the strategy is nice and new, it's great, but there's always work going on in the background and a huge team involved there as well, and a lot of work. So in terms of green infrastructure, there's a huge amount of tree planting has gone on in the last year, and there's, I think, 1,300 trees planned or planted in this coming year. We've also secured a huge amount of greenway investment as well, specifically the Passage the passage west to the Marina Greenway and the Greenway and Cycleway. And there's continuing development of our parks infrastructure and upkeep as well. We have plans to enhance ecological corridors, enhance small wetland areas in the city as well. And we have also recently developed a blue-green, green and blue infrastructure study. So that will help channel our efforts and funding in where in terms of development of green infrastructure in the city. And sometimes the green infrastructure can be the easy wins in terms of abating air pollution. Now it is at the other end; it's the receiving end is where where green infrastructure can come into play. But we're also working at the cutting the emissions as well as best we can. Okay. In terms of research and innovation, we're doing a huge amount of work with our colleagues here in the colleagues in UCC, from the Centre for Research in Atmospheric Chemistry. We've done launched a number of projects with them. The dashboard was one. He's setting up the sensor network was the other. Working on some schools projects as Marica has mentioned. So it's really a collaborative effort, and without them, you know, we would be struggling to get some of these innovative projects off the ground. Doing some work with Cork Healthy Cities as well, and we're hoping to expand that work into the future as well. And so it's ongoing. We're always looking for national and European funding, either to be partners with the college or with the university, or to be a driver ourselves. So we're always on the lookout for that as well. And as opportunities come up through the Horizon Europe EU funding and or the EPA funding, we will apply for this funding as it comes available. So that's me from a Cork City point of view. I'm sure there will be lots of questions in the Q&A in the chat. And just to let anyone know, if they want to contact us, you can contact, it's airquality@corkcity.ie, a fairly easy address to remember. And also you can do a web search very quickly for our air quality strategy. I would invite people to have a read of it, have a look at it, and there's some good proposals in there as well. So okay, thank you. That's me.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And thank you to John and to Stig as well for answering so many questions in the chat. If you haven't seen it, definitely check out the Q&A section. There's a lot of typed up answers from John and Stig around different questions. So I'm actually looking for ones that haven't been answered. One that seems to keep coming up is around indoor air quality. I know we are looking at sensor networks outdoors at the moment, but obviously with COVID, we're more and more aware of the importance of good indoor air quality and ventilation as well. So Vishali was asking about, you know, what are the alternatives to solid fuel burning? Someone was talking about new regulations about solid fuel burning or lack of that for buildings, and other questions around liaising with building regulation as well. So maybe, John, a question to you first, and then I might pass over to Kevin. You know, what can we do generally about improving indoor air quality as we spend, you know, 90% of the time indoors? And where can Ireland maybe lead the way on this?
Wow, okay. The main sources of indoor air pollution are in fact some of the things that we do every day, of course. Cooking, all right, that's a major source of indoor air pollution, produces lots of particles. But we also have cleaning, produces dust and particles that get suspended in the air. Using a gas stove generates nitrogen dioxide. So if you have a person in the house who is asthmatic, there might be the possibility of NO2 emissions from a stove triggering their asthma. So in the end, of course, we want fresh air to dilute any pollutants that could be present. So open the doors and windows and use the extraction fan, especially in the kitchen whenever you can.
Very good. And Kevin, in terms of city council initiatives and new regulations on buildings and heating of buildings, what's being done for indoor air quality? Kevin, you're on mute, I think.
Well, I can say from a council point of view, in terms of retrofitting the council housing stock that we have a policy of retrofitting using renewables and doing away with say the carbon or the solid fuel burn and or the gas burn within capability within the houses. So we've done a number of projects in terms of air-to-air heating. I don't know, I think it's Glenamite Park, I think, in the northeast side of the city. There's been a lot of work there in a whole suite of apartments retrofitted. There's a lot of solar panels going on the council housing stock as well. Very often suited to, you know, where we have a terrace of houses or a terrace of flats that the council own. So, and also the outer fabric, where suitable, can be insulated as well. So that's from a housing point of view, and that has, I suppose, a knock-on effect in terms of houses that had only solid fuel burning or solid fuel heating potential only. So that's one facet of it. In terms of, I do know that all new council housing stock will have renewable new builds effectively will have renewables in terms of heating only. That's the policy. Other bits of how to, I suppose, the messaging. You know, councils can go so far. We have so much money. We have so many people that we can roll out there. But I think messaging can be one of the biggest the biggest thing that we can do, is in inform and involve, and get make it easy in terms of how do I do this. I don't want it to sound silly, but one of the simplest things is that when in the mornings when I come into work, we just open up every window and door for the first 10-20 minutes and just get that fresh air into the building. Most houses nowadays would have a carbon monoxide alarm, but perhaps a CO2 alarm, a pushing CO2 alarms would be interesting, because CO2 is rising in your room. That is indicating, well, that there's something going on. Either there's not enough airflow into the room, and or there's a burn, there's PMs, or there's carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide coming off your solid fuel fire, perhaps. So I think it's a messaging is where we can possibly have the greatest effect to citizens, that and across the getting it between that cross between, I suppose, the buildings that the council own and maintain, and the other private commercial building and private residences. So that's where I think we can have the greatest impact, and that's something we will work on in the coming year as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. And some hands from Stig and from Dean. So Stig, did you want to comment on that?
Yes. Yeah, just like to point out that a very important part of improving indoor air quality is to tackle outdoor air pollution. And we have done some monitoring in houses, again using low-cost sensors, but the results do indicate that a lot of the particles that we measure indoors, they come from outdoor sources. And and if you are burning solid fuel, the particles, of course, come out your chimney, but they also come into your house.
Yeah, very good point. And Dean?
Yeah, so indoor air quality is getting a lot more attention, but actually nationally and Europe-wide, there isn't very much in the way of regulation around indoor air quality. It's not really enforceable, and even if it was, it probably wouldn't be something for a local authority to act on. So it's a challenging topic, and I mean, it's coming to the fore because, you know, as our building fabrics become tighter and we're getting less ventilation, so we have pollutant levels building up in them. So people are aware of these issues, but it's going to require some attention and maybe appropriate regulations in terms of how buildings are configured.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to go back to outdoor air quality, there were some answers coming in, but a good few people were asking the question around the importance of greenery, kind of vegetation in cities. And I think John's point was that you would need a literal kind of urban forest in order to have a measurable impact on the overall air quality outdoors. But there is a lot of efforts around greening Cork, installing more trees, and I know that's something the City Council is doing a lot more of. What about this sense of when you're commuting, you want some sort of green vegetation barrier between the traffic emissions and you know, and there's been some research around hedging and trees just at a kind of like height level. Dean, I don't know if you want to comment on that one.
I haven't really, I've seen those recommendations, but not the research, so I can't comment on the trees as barriers. But I think the whole issue of trees is quite complex, actually, because they can also be a source of pollution. You know, they're emitting VOCs into the atmosphere. These can then form particles and ozone as well. Of course, they're also acting as surface area on which particles can be taken up, so then they can also remove things. So they're quite complex because, you know, they're addressing multiple issues, including stuff like thermal heat stress that might be important during heat waves, probably not in Ireland, but elsewhere. But just a figure in terms of the sorts of amounts of trees we need to plant. Los Angeles, I think we're planning to plant 1 million trees. Of course, it's quite a big urban area. I think the Glasgow area and local councils, so outside the city, they're planning on planting 20 million trees. So when you start speaking about trees, then you need to speak in terms of very, very large numbers indeed. One advantage of the trees, I think, though, is that they're quite dispersed, so they'll be across the whole city. So if there is pollutant removal, then it'll be addressing a large part of the city.
Yeah, thank you very much. Conscious of time here, definitely, hopefully you've had a chance to have your questions answered through the text, if not verbally. I have one final question for all of our panelists, and I'll come to each of you in turn, which is, you know, there's a lot that's been done on air quality measures, a lot that still needs to be done, and maybe a lot of awareness to be raised as well. What makes you optimistic about the future of Cork's air quality? Maybe I'll start in order of the speakers. So John, over to you.
Well, what makes me optimistic is the fact that we have now great buy-in from the city council. You know, I was only talking with Stig and Dean earlier today. When we were talking with the city council over 5 years ago, there wasn't very much of a reaction from towards our ideas, but now there is. And so we're very pleased that Kevin and his team and his colleagues in the city council are really working hard to improve air quality. They produced the first nationwide air quality strategy for local authority. And so I think that leading from the front with our support, which we're delighted to give, I think that is my reason for being optimistic about Cork's air quality.
Thanks very much. And Stig?
Yes, I'd like to echo John there. I mean, it's very important that there is leadership from the council, and that's very important, because individuals can only do so much. And if you're tackling air quality, you're also tackling climate. So I think the fact that there is a drive to tackle climate at the moment will also have a positive impact on air quality. So if I may just mention for the record, I'm not that with the indoor air quality, ventilation is very important. So just outdoor air quality will impact your house, whether your windows are closed or not. So it's of course important to ventilate. On the topic of vegetation, it actually does help to have, there are certain plants that will improve air quality indoors, and it'll have much more of an impact if you have the plants indoors than if you have them in the street.
That's a good point. And Marica, feeling optimistic about Cork air quality?
Well, I come from the perspective of that engagement piece, and the thing that, you know, even the fact that I, as a psychologist, I'm now involved in a number of projects. I think that seeing the developments like the interdisciplinary development, but also these community links, these research community links, they can only bring more awareness for people and more engagement for the public, which is crucially important to move the agenda forward and to kind of promote positive change. So I'm very optimistic because I'm seeing those kind of small positive steps happening already.
Thank you. And Dean?
Well, maybe I'm a little bit grumpy because John took the answer about working with the city council. So that is a huge win. And then I was thinking, what am I going to say next? Well, the obvious is the co-benefits with climate mitigation. And of course, Stig took that one. And so I was thinking, well, Marica came up. And of course, working in terms of not just emissions, but also in terms of human behavior is so important. So I don't have any answers. They've all been said before, but they're all very, very positive.
Very good. And finally, Kevin?
Yeah, rather not to repeat what the previous guys have said, but the development of our strategy has shown a commitment from the council, in fairness, to that we've taken the issue seriously, that we now have a planned a plan of attack as such, how to tackle what we want to do, and working with the various state entities and the college sector as well, and the public. You know, let's get we can dream up our lovely little science projects ourselves, but they must reflect and be useful for the general public as well. So I think an awareness campaign we'll start out a Cork specific awareness campaign, and developing with schools, etc. And again, a lot of which will be just demonstration projects with the schools, but the idea is to roll them out, you know. And I'm happy to say that we are working at the moment in terms of developing a schools air quality pack, which we will roll out either this year or in Q1 next year. And we are also enhancing the air quality monitoring across the city as well. So in terms of nitrogen dioxide as well, so that we will soon have a larger, I suppose, a greater density of particularly NOx across the city centre, which I think will help inform us and involve us as well in terms of are the actions that we're already taking as a council in terms of pedestrianisation of our streets, specifically in the city centre in the Plunkett Street area, and the traffic restrictions on Patrick Street. These sensors will actually tell us are the measures we've taken actually having an effect, you know. So by now they're only indicative, but the trend will tell us that yes, there is a drop in NOx due to the restrictions of traffic on Patrick Street, etc. And I think there's huge potential into the future of further electrification of maybe the council fleet. So we've done huge work on that already, but actually trying to get across the freight electrification, the non-council, the commercial element of it, that would be a huge body of work there to do as well, in terms of trying to, again, we can only nudge and bring the ideas forward, like, and say, look, with these restrictions, here's the impact on air quality, and with the sensors that we will set up around the city, this will be the proof, I suppose, of yes, this impact, this action had this impact, you know, in terms of air quality. So yeah, there's a whole suite of them. Check out the air quality strategy and all the 67 objectives in it.
Definitely. And on that note, I did put a link in the comment section, in the chat section,
Sure.
to that. So definitely have a read through. I was looking through it this morning. Really interesting and really encouraging, actually. So well done on that piece of work. I'm just going to share the final thank you slide, which is to say, sadly, we have to bring the event to close. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to our speakers as well for taking part. Do check out the Cork Air Quality Dashboard. The link is there. Get in touch with me through the email, the Radical Air info email, which is on your screen, and I can pass you on to any of the speakers if you have follow-up questions. And on Monday afternoon, we'll email around the recording. You're welcome to share it with any friends and family who couldn't join us today. There'll be links to find out more about air quality in Cork, as well as a feedback form and, of course, the recording. So until then, have a lovely weekend, and thank you very much for joining us.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.